Welcome back to another class on the treasures of Mishnayot. We are in Mishnayot of Berachot, Perek Vav, Mishnah Vav. This will be part one of the shiur, as there is a lengthy introduction from the Kahati. Before we do the Kahati, I just want to give you a small summary on what he's going to speak about, just to simplify the learning. The Kahati is going to bring down, and he's going to tell us like this: if you have two people, if you have two people that ate together, one of them is able to fulfill his obligation with his friend. That means to say, if you have Reuven and Shimon, they both want to sit down now to have a bread meal, or they want to eat an apple together, whatever they want to eat. One of them is able to go ahead and fulfill the other person's obligation in the blessing. That means to say, let's say Reuven has an apple and Shimon has an apple. Or better yet, let's talk about the Mishnah, because the Mishnah is going to speak about bread, but applies to anything else. Let's say Reuven has a loaf of bread in front of him, and Shimon has a loaf of bread in front of him. Now, when Reuven says the blessing of Hamotzi Lech Min Haaretz on the piece of bread, and we're going to see which three conditions have to be met. By Reuven saying the blessing of Hamotzi Lech Min Haaretz, he fulfills the obligation for Shimon. So therefore, when Reuven is saying the blessing of Hamotzi, it's in a way as saying that Shimon's also saying that blessing. So by Shimon answering only Amen after the end of the blessing, automatically he's inside the blessing of Reuven. So Shimon is also allowed to go ahead and eat his bread without blessing Hamotzi Lechem Min Haaretz. And this is what we're saying over here. Two people that ate together, one of them, let's say in this case Shimon, is able to fulfill his obligation with his friend Reuven. That means to say Shimon is not going to bless anything, since Reuven already blessed the blessing. That blessing is also going to help for Shimon. The Kahati is going to continue, he's going to tell us this law applies to all blessings. However, there are three conditions that first must be applicable. Number one, very, very important. A lot of people don't know this halakha. And by the way, everything what I'm about to read for you now is halakha also. Number one, the one that is blessing, he has to have kavanah, that is fulfilling his obligation. Now, you can relate to this when you do kiddush on Friday night and hamotzi on Shabbat. You can relate to it. This is exactly the case. When you go to somebody's house, let's say the guy's an ignoramus, he doesn't know the laws. Now he takes a cup of wine and he says, you see, he can't even say the words correctly. Sabri Baranan, right? You don't know what he's doing. Baruch Atah Hashem, Bori Pragefen, right? And then the Baruch Atah Hashem, Kadesh Shabbat. Are you yotze with him? Lechatchila, you're not yotze with him. No, you're not yotze with him. Because one of the laws, in order to be yotze with somebody else, yotze means to fulfill your obligation in that blessing with someone else, is yes, at first have kavanah with you. That means to say, let's say Reuven and Shimon are sitting together. Reuven has to have in his mind that the blessing that I'm saying now is also going to go ahead and help Shimon. With this blessing, I want to take out Shimon's obligation in the blessing of the bread. That is the kavanah Reuven has to have. You know something? Let's write like this. This is going on Reuven. Reuven to Shimon, right? He has to have that kavanah. Not two, let's say for Shimon. That is point number one. Point number two, Shimon the point number two is listening to the blessing from the beginning to the end. Shimon must listen to the whole blessing that Reuven is saying. Now, if he doesn't hear the whole blessing, but as long as Reuven says it, b'di'evet, after the fact, there are achronim that say that he's still yotzeh. However, according to the Shulchan Aruch, you're not yotzeh. So therefore, let's stick with the Shulchan Aruch. One who's listening the blessing from someone else and he wants to fulfill his obligation with that person, he has to make sure that he listens to the blessing from the beginning to the end. Therefore, it is very important the person that is saying the blessing, say the blessing calmly, slowly, and correctly. A lot of times you see it, what bracha did you say? You know, sometimes if you pay close attention when people bless, you can't hear the Elokeinu, you can't hear the Melech, you can't hear the Ha'olam. Sometimes you can't even hear the Atab because they say it so fast. So that's why the one that is blessing in this situation, Reuven, he has to make sure he says the bracha calmly. Baruch Ata Hashem Elokeinu Melech Ha'olam Hamotzi Lechem Min Haaretz. No, that you can't hear nothing. You have to be able to hear the blessing from the beginning to the end, word for word, every single word in the blessing. That is number two. That is placed on Shimon, the listening, on Reuven, the saying the blessing correctly. Number three. Over here we explained that Reuven has to have kavanah for Shimon. Over here we're going to tell you like this. Shimon has to have now kavanah for Reuven. Same thing, just backwards. What I explained over here, that Reuven had to have kavanah for Shimon, now Shimon has to have kavanah for Reuven. What does that mean? The one listening should also have kavanah. That means when Shimon is listening to Reuven say the blessing, before Reuven begins the blessing, Shimon should have in mind, I want to fulfill my obligation with Reuven's blessing. Again, it's not enough that Reuven has kavanah to fulfill his obligation for Shimon, meaning to fulfill with the blessing of a mochi for Shimon. That's not enough. Shimon also have to now go back and say in his mind, I also want to fulfill my obligation with Reuven's blessing. Once you have all these three criterias, then we're going to tell you lechatchila, the best possible way, the initial way you fulfill your obligation when it comes to blessing. So let's do this one more time. This law that one is able to fulfill his obligation with his friend applies to all blessings. Three conditions apply. Number one, kavanah. Reuven has to have kavanah for Shimon. Number two, Shimon must listen to the blessing from the beginning to the end, from Reuven. Reuven has to say it calmly, slowly, that Shimon can understand every single word. Number three, the one listening should also have kavanah. Over here in this case, Shimon has to have kavanah for Reuven, meaning Shimon is going to say, I want to fulfill my obligation with Reuven, and Reuven is going to say, I want to fulfill Shimon's obligation. Okay. Now, the next thing the Qadi is going to bring down, he's going to bring down to us, there's such a thing that's called Birkat HaNehenen versus Birkat HaMitzvot. What is the difference between Birkat HaNehenen, which literally means blessings of enjoyment, meaning when you bless on a food where you get enjoyment from, any food, or even something to smell, any you get enjoyment from, versus regular blessings, Birkat HaMitzvot, versus blessings which are done on mitzvot. What is the difference between blessings of enjoyment and regular blessings? Very big difference. All this that I just said up to now will apply for regular blessings, meaning for Birkot HaMitzvot. Not necessarily does it apply for blessings of enjoyment. What do I mean? When it comes to blessings of enjoyment, the rule is, in order for me to be able to fulfill somebody else's obligation with my bracha, he has to be able to do the same thing I'm doing now. So let's go like this. Let's say I have a cup of water in my hand. Now, he also has a cup of water in his hand. Now I can go ahead and fulfill the obligation of shahakol for him, and he can listen with me like we explained. But that's as long as he's also drinking shahakol. But what happened if the case was like this? He wants to drink water. I'm not drinking water, and I want to fulfill his obligation in the blessing of shahakol by saying the bracha of shahakol, by him answering amen, and by him drinking it. Can I do that? No, we cannot do that. In order for me to fulfill his obligation, I have to also have a cup in my hand, or an apple, or in this case, bread. But if I'm not eating and he's eating, I cannot say a bracha for him. This is the difference when it comes to blessings of enjoyment. Must eat with them. For example, if I have an apple and he has an apple, I'm able to say Borei Perek and take out his obligation in that blessing, and he could eat his apple. But if I'm not eating an apple and he's eating an apple, I can't say Borei Perek and he can't eat. However, when you look at the regular blessing, meaning Birkot HaMitzvot, over there is a very big difference. Even if you fulfilled the mitzvah, still you can say the bracha for someone else. Like tefillin, lulav, etc. I will explain. By Birkot HaMitzvot, there's a very big difference versus Birkot HaNehenin. Why? By Birkot HaMitzvot, even if you fulfilled your obligation, for example, you woke up early in the morning, you went to Davanet, you put on tefillin, your talit, whatever it is. You're about to leave, a ignorant person that comes, he never in his life put on tefillin. He can't even say the brachot. He can't say nothing. He doesn't know aleph bet. For the first time he walks into shul, for the first time he wants to put on tefillin and talit. Can he, let's say the ignorant person is Shimon. Can Shimon put the tefillin on his hand and say, okay, Reuven, go ahead, you say the blessing and I'll put on the tefillin. Can you do that when it comes to Birkot HaMitzvot? Yes, you can. But one second, but Reuven fulfilled his obligation. It doesn't matter. Even if Reuven fulfills obligation in the mitzvah of tefillin, still he's able to go ahead and say the blessing for someone else who did not fulfill their obligation. Because we're going to see the Kahati is going to explain, when it comes to mitzvot, every single person is a guarantor for the next. If your fellow Jew didn't do it, it's as if you didn't do it. So when I'm saying the blessing, I'm really also saying it for myself. So therefore, let's say I put on tefillin and he didn't put on tefillin. Now, when it comes 8 o'clock and now he wants to put on tefillin, I can say the blessing of Asher Kiddushan b'mitzvot v'tzvanu la'aniach tefillin. He's going to answer amen. He's going to put on tefillin. I'm not putting on tefillin. He's putting on tefillin. Or the blessing of the itatev b'tzitzit. The wrapping of the tzitzit. I'll say the blessing. He'll put on the tzitzit. Or lulav. I'll say al nitzelat lulav, and he's going to shake. I'm not doing nothing. I have nothing with me. I already did all my mitzvot. This is the difference between regular blessings versus blessings of enjoyment. Now I just made a small chart over here, like I just explained. We have Birkot Shel Mitzvot and you have Birkot Shel Nehenin. When it comes to Birkot Shel Mitzvot, Kol Yisrael Arevim Zeh Al Zeh. Every single Jew is responsible for another Jew. So therefore you have an obligation. When it comes to Birkot HaNehenin, Kan en chova. Over here, there's no obligation. What am I? Am I obligated to see that you eat today? Am I obligated to see that you're going to drink today? There's no obligation. So therefore, what am I going to tell you? By Birkot HaNehenin, if I want to fulfill somebody else's obligation, good. I have to have a food in my hand. He has to have a food in his hand. By Birkot HaMitzvot, since we're responsible for one another, I don't have to be putting on tefillin at this moment of time, because I already put it on in the morning. Now when somebody else wants to put it on, I can go ahead and say the blessing without a problem. Alright, so I just gave you a small overview. Let's just see this in the Kahati now. The Kahati begins, Amru Chachamim, the rabbi said, Shnaim shachlu kechad, if you had two people that ate together, Echad mehem yotzeh bebirkat chaver, one of them is able to fulfill his obligation with the blessing of his friend. He brings it down from Masechet Berachot, Daf Memhei Amud Bet. V'kachi ha'halacha b'chol ha'berachot. This is the halacha in all of the berachot. She'echad yachol levarech u'lotzi b'berkato et acherim yidei chovatan. That one person is able to go ahead and bless and fulfill other people's obligation with his blessing. Eila sheyesh bazeh shalosh tanaim. But rather you have over here 3 conditions. Number 1, שהמברך יתכוון להוציא את השומעים בידי חובתן. The one that is blessing, he has to have kavanah to fulfill the obligation of the ones that are listening to him. Like I explained. Number 2, שהאחרים ישמעו את הברכה כולה מתחילה ועד סופה. That other people that are listening to the bracha, they have to hear the blessing from the beginning till the end. Number 3, the ones that are listening, they should also have kavanah to fulfill the obligation with the one that is saying the blessing. There is a difference when it comes to blessings of enjoyment to other berachot. שבכל הברכות אף מי שכבר יצא ידי חובתו יכול לברך כדי להוציא אחרים ידי חובתן. In other berachot, meaning berachot mitzvot over here, even if one fulfills his obligation already, he's able to go ahead and bless and fulfill other people's obligation, even though he's not doing it at this moment now. But when you're dealing with blessings of enjoyment, if he already fulfills his obligation, he's not able to go ahead and fulfill other people's obligation. He brings it down from a second Rosh Hashanah, Daf Chavted, Amur Aleph. Now he explains the difference between them. Why is there such a big difference? Why by Birkat HaNehenen, like I explained, why by Birkat HaNehenen, you're able to bless for someone even if you already did the mitzvah. But Birkat HaMitzvot, but by Birkat, no, the other way around. By Birkat HaMitzvot, why over there we're going to tell that even if you already did the mitzvah, you're able to go ahead and you are able to go ahead and bless for someone else and fulfill their obligation. But for Birkat HaNehenen, know that if you're already eating an apple, now he wants to eat an apple, you can't go bless for him. Why is that? So he says like this. Tama Hevdal, the reason for the difference, Shebinehem between them, Mevur B'Rashi is to explain the Rashi over there, Sheha-mitzvot chova hen al kol adam. Mitzvot, when you're dealing with the commandments, they are an obligation on every single individual. Ve'ho'il, and since v'chol Yisrael arivim zel b'zeh, since every single Jew is a guarantor for the next, the one who is blessing, it's as if he's obligated in that thing. Aval, however, Birkat HaNehenen, but when you're dealing with the blessing of enjoyment, even though there's an obligation on the one who gets enjoyment from the food to bless, nevertheless, but there's no obligation for him to go and enjoy in order to bless. Whenever he wants to eat, he's going to eat. Whenever he doesn't want to eat, he's not going to eat. You can't tell me that he has an obligation. Therefore, there's no responsibility on him in this bracha. That's why he's exempt from it. So therefore, he's not able to go ahead and fulfill the obligation of his friend that's getting enjoyment from the food, and he's obligated in it. Now he moves on to the next piece. Mishnatenu Balalamed, our Mishnah comes to teach us, Sheyesh beberkot hanehenen tanai nosaf. When you're dealing with the blessings of enjoyment, you have an extra condition. Vehu, and that is hakiviyut, establishment. Kolomer, meaning to say, she'en echad yachol lotzi beberkoto et acherem b'yedei chovatan, ela im ken kav'u lahem su'uda bechabura. One person is not able to fulfill the other people's obligation with his blessing unless they have established for themselves a meal where they're going to eat together as a group. Now he's going to go on and explain what this means. The custom was back then in their days, when they would gather as a group for a meal, they would recline on beds, and they would support themselves off their left hand, but they would always eat in a reclining manner. Mikan, from here, so we see from over here, when was the kivut, when was the establishment for a meal? In their days, that's only when they sat down to recline. Baram, however, biyamenu, nowadays, we're not accustomed to eat in a reclined fashion. This is what we sit today on one table, it's as if they're reclining. And so too, it said over there, if you had several people that they invited themselves for a meal, and they said this, let's go, V'nis od b'makom plon. Let's go and have a meal over there. Even though they sat down without reclining, that's considered to be an establishment. Now, I didn't explain this over here in the introduction. I want to explain this now. The third piece is kiviut. This is very important. Let me try to explain to us how it's practical to us today. If you pay close attention on Friday night or even on Saturday morning, on the Shabbat meals, when the father of the house washes the hands, he sits down to eat, meaning he sits down to start blessing the blessing of Hamot Lachem Min Haaretz. Majority of the times, who's the one that's always left behind? It's the wife. Or sometimes it could be the smaller kids. So what does the father do? He says, right? Because right now the bread is going to run away if he's not going to say it quickly. Okay. But what happened? The wife still didn't sit down, or the child still didn't sit down. That type of fulfillment of Hamot Lachem Min Haaretz is b'di'evid. In order to be able to do the proper fulfilling their obligation in the blessing of Hamot Lachem Min Haaretz, they must sit down. That means on Friday night or Saturday morning or through any other time of the week, when a person wants to fulfill his friend's obligation, when it comes with bread, they have to sit down. Once we sit down, we are establishing that this is the place where we want to eat. Once we have that establishment, automatically we're going to tell you, now you're able to go ahead and bless the blessing for someone else with the other three criteria. So this is why it's very important to know this. So I want to just clarify something over here. Back then, how did they do it? They used to, you know, how if you ever seen Arabs, how they recline on mattresses, or even the biggest chachamim, if you ever see old pictures, they used to lay down on mattress. They used to have a small mattress. They used to sit on the mattress. Then they would recline to the left side. By reclining to the left side, automatically they show that we are ready to eat. That reclining was their establishment. So now over there, the one who was the head of the household, or any other person, he would go on and now he would say the blessing of Hamot Lachem Min Haaretz, and everybody would fulfill their obligation with him. But let's say, just let me tell like this. What happens if I'm standing over here, another person is standing over there, another person is standing over there, another person is standing over there, and I'm saying Hamot Lachem Min Haaretz. Can I fulfill the obligation? I'll tell you, you listen to me, I listen to you, right? Do they fulfill the obligation? Lechatchila, they don't fulfill the obligation. B'di'evid, because we don't want to have any problems with berachot of saying unnecessary blessings or saying blessings in vain. We're going to tell you, you do fulfill your obligation if it already happened. But lechatchila, we want everybody to be sitting on the table. So this is what the Mishnah says, that back then they used to do haseva. They used to recline. That was good by them. Today, it's enough for a person to sit. Once you sit, it's as if they're reclining. So that is another condition we should just write over here. Let me just erase this. Let me just erase this. 1 second. So just erase this. Condition number 4, you have to have kivyut. Okay. You have to have an establishment. And how do we establish today? Back then, they used to recline. Today, by us sitting on one place, that's our establishment. So therefore, if you want to do the mitzvah, lechatchila, the proper way, the way it's supposed to be done, you have to wait for everyone to gather, and not only to gather around the table, but to actually sit in their chair, and only then can you go ahead and say the blessing of Hamotzi Lechem Min Haaretz.